Hi everyone. Uh, Thought I'd talk about something quite close to my heart, um, which is addiction and the issues I've had for many a moon over it. Uh, Not quite sure where this is going to go, so I'm probably just going to waffle and ramble, but we'll just see where it takes us. Um, so I just realised today is my 30th day of abstinence from cannabis. Um, Major problems with addiction over the years. Cannabis, binge drinking, pretty much anything I could get my hands on. If somebody had put it in front of me, the odds are I would probably take it. Um, so I don't know. I suppose the best place with like most of these things is like from the start, really. Um, Lots of mental health issues as a kid, and I think a lot of those seeds were probably sown from quite an early age before addiction sort of even reared its head. Um, really sort of started in my early mid-teens. Had a lot of trouble with eczema as a teenager. Was always sort of quite highly strung. Pushed very hard as an only child. Um, and at secondary school, the wheels came off, and I just wasn't capable of achieving maybe what I might have been able to. Um, so yeah, probably from I don't know 12, something like that. I was put on sleeping tablets, which I really liked. Sort of how numb it used to make me feel, considering the amount of sort of mental traffic in my head. Um, Always been a bit of an issue with me. And if I had a penny for everyone, penny for every time somebody had said to me, like, if you could just stop thinking, like, it'd solve all manner of your problems, which, yeah, it is true, but it's taken me a long time to sort of really address my mental health issues. Um, I think as far as like addiction goes, I think we often sort of fail to understand that like childhood trauma leads to mental health issues, which in turn often leads to substance abuse. Um, so yeah, from sleeping tablets, once they stopped working, I would take sort of more and more of them and try to find the edge of like where I could sort of tip myself over. To as I mentioned before, sorry mum, sorry dad up there. Um, I used to sort of raid my mum and dad's spirits cabinet, top them up with water, etc. Make all manner of like ridiculous sort of cocktails and just knock them back. Um, so yeah, from finishing my GCSEs when I was 16, um, it was just like such an almighty relief, from being in this sort of real straight jacket during my sort of formative years. I went to college and found cannabis, which I can still remember that first time I got high. And on the bus on the way back from college, just not being able to stop laughing. And coming home and thinking like, wow, this is something. I think I might have found something. But there's a difference for some people between, being able to sort of put something down or constantly feeling like you need something to sort of abate your nerves. And sadly, I think I've always sort of fallen firmly in that latter category. And it's done untold sort of damage over the years, from this reasonably bright kid. I've never really sort of been able to apply the ability that I've got into anything sort of tangible, or even I think when I have done, I've really struggled to sort of hold it down long term before I've kind of shook myself apart. So, um, quite how I've got to 30 days without a smoke, I have no idea. Genuinely no idea. But I think sometimes I think things have to be possibly as bad as they can possibly get. And I've had a habit of like finding all new lows over the years, which have just been crushing. Um, I came across a note I'd written to myself just before Christmas saying, no more running, time to find who you are, don't be afraid. And that coincided with a period where I was looking to abstain. And I remember coming across it a few weeks later and it just really crushing me because I think I'd made it like 2, 3 days and then just ended back up right where I was. And I think over this last sort of year or two, each time I've sort of edged closer to this, it's just got substantially worse and worse. And the usage has sort of gone up to the stage where I was spending between sort of £200 or £300 a month, which I don't know, in like US dollars is like sort of 400 there or thereabouts. And considering I'm out of work with mental health issues and have been now for almost 2 years, this is just money I've not got. And I've just sort of frittered it away each time. And with each sort of benefits payment, I've dreaded it, thinking, I'm going to have this lump sum of money here and I know where it's going to go to, the guy that I used to buy off. So, as I've kind of gone through this period, um, my initial sort of determination was to make it from this last payment that I got on the 20th of this month to the 20th of February without having picked anything up. And I thought, that to me will be a massive, massive milestone, something that I wasn't quite sure that I could achieve. I mean, obviously, I'm not there yet, but it just kind of struck me earlier on that, like, shit, man, you're on 30 days. And I know a lot of people would look at this and say, like, well, it's only cannabis, like, what's the issue, you know? Because a lot of people can sort of pick this stuff up and sort of drop it, or frankly, a lot of people who I know think they haven't got an issue when in reality they have. But I think a lot of it is in, they're lacking sort of self admission, or they're so deeply sort of entrenched in it that facing up to it is sort of a very painful thing. And how do you go about sort of implementing those changes? Um, so from 17 to 41, um, my long-term memory has always been like painfully good, way, way, way too good. I don't forget. But I can't say cannabis has probably helped like a lot of the symptoms of like ADHD that I have as well. That I know have been sort of present really since sort of early age. Um, but I think over time, I've been sort of highly aware that my mental health has just sort of disintegrated more and more and more, and I've become more of a sort of complex, confused, and upset, lost, and sort of bewildered adult, really. Um, and I just sort of wanted to address sort of some of the attitudes that I'd sort of heard in terms of cannabis use not being something that's sort of, well, like a major addiction. Um, so obviously, it caused issues with my parents because neither of them were drug users. They used to have a bit of a drink, but like they weren't out of control really, apart from sort of stressful periods. Um, and it really upset them because they couldn't relate to it and they just felt like I was pissing all my ability and whatever aptitude and talent I had out of the window. And ultimately, I guess they just wanted the best for me. But me being stubborn old me, I think the harder anybody pushes, the harder I sort of push back, which isn't the greatest. Um, so, realistically, when I look at it through relationships that I've had from like my teens, 20s, 30s, I've had significant issues, and it leads to this sort of split person. I discussed this in like a previous video, how a lot of me still has like that childlike awe that looks at the world with wonder and is fascinated and just wants to learn, and is full of love and passion. And I think the broken sort of conflicted teenager and a lot of the issues that I went through at school, with sort of intense bullying and um, it really sort of crushed me, and I became very, very sort of insular and introverted, and which is something, through sort of heavy periods of use that I've had real issues with over the years, and I just kind of shut myself away from the world really. Um, and then come out of these holes with like just a list of problems that I've just not addressed in sort of any way, shape, or form. Um, Caused a lot of issues in my marriage, obviously. I wasn't really a sort of, like major sort of daytime smoker through that period. But there were times where I looked to just cram it in as much as possible, and caused big issues, big rifts, really, in my marriage, which I look at and I take responsibility for. Um, Taken me a long time to sort of make sense of that path that I've walked through life, and it's a little bit like having being like a car and having like an engine with like decent horsepower, but tires that are just completely bald that in no way can sort of apply the traction to the tarmac. And I suppose I've spent much of my life wheel spinning, really. Um, I think I've had psychosis a number of times as a result of it. Probably, I would say maybe at least half a dozen times that I can look back and sort of put my finger on and think, yeah, I sort of really strayed into like sort of deluded thoughts, broken thought patterns, illogical reasoning, massive sort of spells of paranoia. Um, and I don't know, I'm not getting any younger. Um, I had that sort of really from finishing my GCSEs. I remember going and buying like a massive crate load of booze and basically going and parking myself in the garden on one of the sun loungers. My dad coming out and looking at like this massive booze and being like, oh my god. But I remember going to a party with my folks when I was about 16 and drinking that much that I remember going to bed that night and having really strange dreams of sort of something burning my throat and choking, feeling like I was drowning and something was burning my throat. And I kind of woke up and realised basically that I'd been sick in my sleep. I was absolutely hammered. So I'd fallen asleep on my back and woke up. I'd obviously been sick in my sleep and was very lucky not to have sort of choked. So that frightened the shit out of me, quite frankly. And I thought, you know, I can't do this. So didn't drink for a few months and then did pretty much the same, very similar incident a few months afterwards. And it frightened the crap out of me. So, I went to college not that long after and came across something that gave me a place to hide, something that numbed everything, that switched off sort of all the pain to begin with. Didn't last long, and probably within like a couple of months I knew I had sort of quite a serious issue, but didn't really want to admit it or reach out, and my folks were worried about me. I remember the New Year's Eve that year I'd had like tonsillitis, and my parents were so worried about like, why is this 17-year-old like not wanting to go out like with his pals and go drinking. But the seeds of it had already sort of been sown really, and all I wanted to do really was just stay in, sort of get myself well and just have a smoke. Um, so yeah, 24 years later, here I am. um, a lot of feelings of sort of deep shame, regret, resentment, anxiety, profound sort of problems and issues with depression, suicidal tendencies, ideation. I think I always realised what it would do to people around me if I did take that step, though, which I think has been the thing that sort of, on one hand, stopped me, and on the other hand, made me think, well, I can approach this as if like I'm accelerating like the horizon of death towards me, and if I just smoke myself retarded enough, I hoped, frankly, that I would either die from like a massive heart attack young, or some serious illness, which is just this crazy thinking. But like, when you say it to people, when you verbalize it out loud. But I just see now that like my sense of self-worth was so low, and I've always had like super complex sort of mental health issues that I think in turn have all sort of compounded each other, and the smoke, etc., and the binge drinking, which probably started, well, who am I trying to kid? At 16, and I've sort of been maybe on and off with it. But over the years, I think the more of like a tolerance I built up with cannabis, the more I felt like I needed something else just to see me over, the edge. And for nearly sort of 2.5, 3 decades, I would just smoke myself into a stupor until I just passed out. So, quite arm here, I have no idea. There's a number of times I've come very, very, very close to, just to ending it all. But something seems to have sort of stopped me each time. Convinced, always been convinced that there's been something looking out for me, something watching over me. Whether, whatever you want to say, whether that's like loved ones I've lost, um, or some sense of sort of higher self that's just kind of hit the emergency brake. Going back a few years ago, I was on my way to go and jump off one of the local railway bridges, a viaduct, which certainly would have been high enough to do the job. Would have been a fucking awful way to go, and would have traumatized, anybody who might have come across it. Um, so I think over time, I've kind of looked for other means of achieving it, whether that was something that was quick and relatively painless. I contemplated just electrocuting myself, just to stop my heart, or overdosing. But the flat I live in now, and the spot that I'm sat in, the previous tenant who lived here was a lad I knew when I was like between 18 and 21, and he overdosed in the exact same spot that I'm sat. And when I came to look around the flat, I'd heard through a friend that basically this lad had passed away. I didn't know the circumstances. So when the housing officer showed me around, she said, look, it's yours, but I need to make you aware of sort of what happened. And it's like, okay, I know. So I accepted it because it didn't, the thought of it didn't really freak me out. I had like a lot of affection for this lad, so I don't know. I kind of, there was part of me that felt that like he would have wanted me to have it. He always used to look after me and teach me like Italian phrases to go and chat women up with, which I never had the confidence to do. But he sort of took me under his wing. And I think this last couple of years since this whole schmozzle was kicked off, which you all know what I'm talking about, because if it hasn't fucked your life up, then I'm amazed, quite frankly. But I'd looked at this last sort of couple of years as like my window basically to sort of slowly drift away. Been a horrible sort of few years. Um, Difficult last 10 years, in fairness. Bit off way more than I could chew. Got married, had three stepsons who I still miss, but had to walk away from so that they could carry on their lives. Um, Difficult one to explain. But then I suppose, I don't really need to explain myself about everything. I've this tendency towards sort of justifying my every move, and I kind of realised in the end that I don't need to. It's gone. So I was juggling full time uni and working part time, and it was just too much. So from 2012 to 2022, I've just nosedived and I've abused myself so heavily. Started hitting the booze a bit heavier sort of over time. But thought I had it under control, which is bullshit really. And we separated, and I took to drinking every day when I'd moved in at my mate's house, drinking cheap shitty cider. So just poisoning myself full of like synthetic crap that's like never seen an apple in its life. Um, Smoking myself into oblivion, and I got to, I think it was about a month after my birthday, and just decided that like this was it. Just no more. I'd managed to find THC in sort of vape oil. So I was doing a mixture of drinking, smoking weed, and vaping weed. And my head went west. So one of the problems that I have is in the way I smoke it, or the way I hammer myself, is that I might have like a short period of abstinence, then I pick up and I have it under control for a few days, thinking I can just moderate it, I can just moderate it. And then that guilt kicks in again of like, you fucking idiot, you've picked up again, rah rah this, rah rah that. And I just binge it. I'm not one of those people that's just like, right, I'm just going to give what I've got to someone else. It's like, I've got to have it and I've got to have it all. So, to a large degree, like, drugs weren't the issue. I was. And if anything, it's not that I wasn't safe from drugs. Drugs were not safe from me. And I just, one, two, three was never enough. Sometimes 15 spliffs in a day was never enough. And I'm not talking like little toothpicks, I'm talking like big, long ones. So I had a period of about sort of 3 months of abstaining just before I moved in here. And I was all over the place. I attended like a few Narcotics Anonymous meetings with a friend, but it wasn't something that I sort of stuck to. And to a degree now, when I look at it, like, I've not always been the biggest fan of technology, but like Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Marijuana Anonymous, they can all take place over Zoom meetings. So I attend other meetings with friends over Zoom, and I think I think it's a brilliant app, and it's actually one of the things that I've got credit with helping me through this. So this last couple of years has been rough, and I was sort of coming to terms with the marriage that had failed. I don't adapt well to change. I don't adapt well to rejection. Even though deep down I knew it wasn't working for either of us and it wasn't making either of us happy and needed to come to an end. And in fairness, probably should have done maybe in 2013, 2014. but I clung to what I felt sort of made me feel secure, and it just ended up a complete mess. Um, I loved her, I really did, and I loved those boys, I still do. But I think we both knew it was going to come to like a train wreck in the end. So um, not long after the marriage ended, I was in a really good job, like outreach style work job in healthcare. And I remember applying for it and looking through the job spec and thinking like I've never seen anything that's written as if it was sort of tailor made to me, and like what skills that I do have in terms of being personable. I'm such a deep thinker that the way I think I'd sort of analyse and assess problems was really good, because there was a lot of sort of detective work that went into the job that I did for a service called Focus Care, who are a magnificent service. Um, my dad got diagnosed with bowel cancer, um, and passed away, I think, 7 months later after an operation. He had a never took to, the stoma bag he had fitted, and died of a massive heart attack a few days later. Um, had a very complicated relationship with my dad. Loved him to bits, still do, and I miss you so much, Dad. But he had major mental health issues himself and had a significant hoarding problem. So I live in a small one-bedroom flat. He lived in a pretty large two-bedroom flat, and there was like a spare bedroom that you literally couldn't get into, that was packed top to toe full of stuff. Um, I just made my way back into work as a support worker for a local care firm with adults with learning difficulties that I'd previously worked at. Went to that focus care job, had to leave the focus care job because on top of dad getting ill and the marriage breaking down and my mental health problems flaring up, how that sort of affected me, I just basically stopped eating and lived for about 2 or 3 months on water, nicotine, cannabis, and insufficient food. So it just ate away at my mind and my body, and I just sort of slowly disintegrated. Um, so I ended up on the sick in sort of June, July, about 2 months after the marriage broke down, and it just spiraled. I never made it back to work. So I was out of work from the I was on the sick from like June and didn't make it back into work. I think my first shift back at the care company was like Christmas Eve. And I was just so happy to be back around people who I really cared about and just really made my day. Adults with learning difficulties are the most beautiful people that you could ever wish to surround yourself with. They're not full of all this egoic bullshit that like the majority of complex folk out there are, or even simple ones. um, but I couldn't face everything. So dad died. I brought all the stuff from Hoarder's Paradise basically back here. Didn't have a bedroom for a year because it was stacked more or less floor to ceiling. My hallway, my massive storage cupboards, more or less, I would say, at least 60% of the flat was full. Um, so this, it all wasn't the kind of stuff that you would just give away. So I think based on the sort of the skills I had, and I'd had a go at eBaying before, and I don't like the idea of just chucking stuff. No problem with donating to charity, no problem whatsoever. Um, but a lot of this was, it was quite valuable stuff. So I spent 18 months working flat out round the clock, either at work or at home eBaying. Um, got a job offer for something on significantly better pay, when in reality I should have just hit the stop button and taken a few months and just, eBayed what I could to sort of create some clear space. Um, but I think that, with a lot of people that go through trauma, they come out of it with this, this real sort of people pleasing issue, never knowing who to please. I've realised who that is now, and I'm not an inconsiderate person. I'm an only child, so you could probably argue that I'm selfish in my own little way, which I try. I don't think I am. I think one of my issues has always been that I put myself so firmly last and invest everything that I've got into others, then end up out of juice completely, go into total shutdown and push people away because I've just got literally nothing to give. um, so after this whole schmozzle of the last sort of couple of years started, um, I'd basically just run myself into the ground, and I'd live with a beautiful little cat, and she's just a little angel. And unfortunately, sort of a few months prior to Christmas, she ended up like covered in fleas, and it literally sort of infested the flat to the degree where I had to rip every carpet up, and I was going around like with flea spray, spraying everywhere, every square inch of the flat every few days, going through can after can of flea spray, and all the stuff from Dad's was in like storage tubs without lids, so they got everywhere. And it was like sort of pestilence, biblical sort of pestilence. I just ended up like covered in like flea bites and stuff like that, which with my eczema didn't help. And yeah, I just fucking crumbled. So it got to the stage where just before the first lockdown occurred in the UK, I'd managed to order some carpet to, have fitted throughout the flat. And the date was fitted. I noticed this big sort of bright red spot on my leg that was like glowing hot, and I've worked around in healthcare for long enough to know that was cellulitis. And it just destroyed me. Absolutely destroyed me. And energy wise, I've just not felt the same since. But I think, when you've pushed your body to sort of that degree, you're just going to go into free fall, and it's going to take you months, maybe if not years, to go through that pain barrier, um, and face the pain of slowing down. So it was brutal. And like I've said, sort of energy wise, I've not been the same since. And I've always been like sort of quite manic, as people who know me full well know. And um, yeah, I'd sort of got the flat to like a livable state in terms of like, having clear space to actually move about in, and all Dad's stuff sort of not being in my eye line everywhere I looked. And I just went into free fall, and I thought I had a pot issue before. Fuck me, I redefined that. So for large chunks of this last sort of 2 years, I've probably been smoking between an ounce and like an ounce and a half a month, which for just over 2 years now, I'm not sure whether I had this illness that's going around just after Christmas, because my lungs were just totally screwed. And I know probably some of that's like compounded by like the amount that I've smoked, and I smoke cigarettes as well. So I know it just all adds up together to like a recipe for not feeling particularly well. Um, and I was out of fight, didn't want to be here, had enough. Um, this world owes us nothing, and I'm not going to kid myself that, even if you tried and you've given all that love and that energy that you've got to give to other people for, for decades, it don't it don't count for nothing. The universe isn't going to roll over and sort of say, oh, that's all right, I'm going to look after you. particularly if you give up, it is going to give you nothing. So, yeah, I just sort of descended into oblivion. And the heavier the sort of the pot usage got, the more disordered and sort of my thought patterns became, the more suicidal I became, and started drinking heavily as well. So I've kind of cut back over this last year, but I've found that I get spells of like binging it where a bottle of wine in a night's like nothing. You know, I could probably drink one and a half and not be sick. Who am I trying to kid? There are times where I was sick and I carried on. So all of this sort of really affected like my self care, which has been poor at times anyhow. And one of the reasons why I think I stuck in the marriage for so long was that I always had this sort of deep rooted feeling that if I went solo, I'd probably be dead within 5 years. And I fully believed it. So the separation occurred 4 years ago, just about. So, about a year away from that. And over this last sort of couple of years, I thought, my initial thought was that I wasn't afraid of what it was that was out there. Because and this is I have consideration for everyone and anyone. So if you've lost somebody over that period of time, my heart goes out to you. I'm so sorry for what you've had to endure and for your loss. Um, I suppose where I'm coming from with this is in terms of our magnificent media and politicians, and from somebody who's been gaslighted so many times over the years. I know when I'm being gaslighted, or at least when things don't add up. So I'm no tin hat sort of conspiracist. I would consider myself, I don't, even the brightest person here on this planet contains literally a thimbleful, if that, of universal knowledge of all there is. And I've never considered myself sort of arrogantly in that sense to be, to know much. The only thing that I'm certain of, or that I know for sure, is nothing. And I remember studying philosophy at university and coming across Socrates' concept of the enlightened man, and thinking, that, yeah, I've never professed to know everything, particularly even things that I do know about, but particularly the things, even that, and also, that which I don't know about. I will never profess to be an expert on anything because that's somewhere towards like the heights of arrogance in the way I see it. Um, so yeah, I'm sort of getting off point again, which I'm very good at. Um, but yeah, over this last couple of years, I just basically thought like I'm not going to make it out of this. I think this is it. I think this is clearly the universe saying to me that your time is nearly up and that your time is short. And sitting now from a perspective of 30 days clean and serene, I understand what that was now, and that this was my last chance. Um, had I not done this, I would have ended up on a psych ward, pumped full of medication that would have sort of compounded issues and not helped me sort of get any clearer in the head. And it probably would have been what had sent me over the edge anyhow. Um, I've had some fantastic support from my local surgery, my doctors, and we've mooted the possibility of like a mood stabilizer because I'm up down up down up down up down, and I'm like a combination at any one time of like 3 or 4 different people. That childlike awe, traumatized teenager, man boy and rational adult that can, be highly ordered and, help other people way better than I can help myself, because I've never truly understood that concept of self love and thought that, that was, being selfish and, not reaching out and helping others, and that my purpose here was, just to give love to others. And if you don't give self love to yourself, you're in no position to give it to anyone else. And you will watch yourself free fall, just like everyone else will around you, and it will scare the crap out of them. And they might not always know, or hardly any of the time, know what to say to you, because our heads are so complex. And, we're paradoxical sort of creatures by nature. So some of us are an extra degree of complexity, which I can fully relate to. Um, but yeah, I just basically chucked the towel in and thought, right, this is it. This is your opportunity, basically, to smoke yourself to death. And I felt so poorly. I've had a couple of spells where everything sort of got too much, where I'd taken a break of about 2 weeks and was just all over the shop, because I've suppressed all these feelings for decades, and I just drowned in them as they sort of came to the surface. Um, no structure in place or anything, and I think the biggest difference now is that I had a friend who nudged me towards Narcotics Anonymous meetings, and I thought that was just going to be full of poor me, and really depressing. But I was amazed when I started engaging with these meetings that, like, you're surrounded by people who have started to engage with change and a process of self-reflection that isn't just pure hatred towards yourself. It's recognition of like how you fucked up through life, or how life is fucked up, and life's sometimes like a matter of damage limitation, or how we come to terms with things. Um, but I've sort of buried myself away for decades, and then when I have come and reached out, I've freaked out, and I've been going to like my pothead mates and try to talk to them about it, and they can kind of understand on one hand, but a lot of them, like I'd said earlier, was so firmly rooted in the patterns that like they were the wrong people to speak to, or speaking to my mum about it, which must have frightened the crap out of her and wasn't really fair on her. Okay, I might have needed somebody to talk to, but like, she's not a drugs counsellor. So, I needed to get myself some help. And I think over this last few years, the friends that I've made since the marital sort of breakdown, I've found myself some amazing friends, some beautiful, beautiful, beautiful people, and you all know who you are. I hope you do. And if I haven't already told you, I love you. I love you all. And you're the reason why I'm here. On top of that, finding some self love for myself, but you're the people who helped me get to this stage. And I've had the most amazing friend for like this last sort of 15 years, who is the most based and sort of level and balanced person that I know. And because I'm so sort of highly strung, it's not like it's been like a battle of egos, because he hasn't got one, and I think for the most part I don't think I have either. But I thought I was just so firmly entrenched in those modalities of just constantly thinking and no respite from it, and thinking like that I was just going to break on through to the other side and sort of, become enlightened, which, quite frankly, I think in terms of reality, the the only thing that's real is nothing, and enlightenment is the dissolution of ego on death. I've tried meditation, mindfulness, wide range of practices, immersing myself in nature, which they do help. Not gonna lie, they definitely do help. Binaural beats as well. There's another really, really good one. But they weren't the answer because there was always something missing, and that was that self love that I lacked. And things snowballed more and more towards last Christmas, and it was just getting desperate. And I developed something of a gambling addiction as well to national lottery, scratch cards, etc. Um, Shows how my head works because I tried developing almost like this algorithmic sort of pattern in my head as to lottery numbers, basing it off like the previous sort of 100 draws, most popular numbers, least popular numbers, range, mode, median, and frequency with which numbers came up, and watching the range in which sort of numbers sort of popped up, and thinking like, I think I've sort of got half an idea as to like how this pattern works. You're talking like odds of like 1 in 60 million or something daft of like hitting that big number, which it's an interesting thing because like a lot of what we think we want in life, do we even really want? Or if we did get it, would it be any good for us? Because frankly, if I'd have come into that amount, I'd still be justifying, probably still be justifying reasons as to like why I could get away with smoking. And I know one would be, never be enough. And I'd think, oh, I can get away with having like one, two, three. And I'd just enter that same sort of merry-go-round of like guilt and then binging it like mad and then binge drinking as well, and just ended up in psychosis, which was where I ended up just prior to Christmas, where the sense of paranoia towards everyone around me, loved ones, people I've known, years, decades, all my life, just thinking they were all against me, thinking I was being watched, observed, attacked by sort of negative entities, which were probably manifestations of my own psyche and my own darkness. This place ain't all love and light, we know that. And you've kind of got to have an understanding of sort of what lurks within the darkness, and that balance of like light and darkness. But I remember walking along. I used to, sort of end up going out for a walk or something, stages where I could get out. And I had this one day where I was walking along this big, busy sort of main road, um, and the voices in my head just encouraging me to throw myself into the traffic or overdose, and just this constant invasive mental dialogue of like, just either like that scene in Bruce Almighty where the filing cabinet sort of fires out, where he's got the whispers of like the world in his head. Yeah, totally relate to that. Loud, angry, aggressive, invasive voices, earworms of like music just playing around in high definition at screaming high volume in my head again and again and again and again. I just thought, fuck, this is going to be it. So that day, I'd ended up sort of going and sitting in the forest and just crying my eyes out for about 20 minutes before thinking that I need to get home, need to have a spliff. And as I come out of the forest back to the main road that I'd wanted to chuck myself into, um, walk down through towards like this industrial estate, and these two chav lads, came screaming past in a car, wheel spinning past me, gawping at me. Got round the corner, they looked at me, and then wheel span off, and I just literally thought like the Matrix is attacking me left, right, and centre, and just got in and shut the door and smoked myself into oblivion. Um, Knew I was going up to a friend's house on New Year's Eve, so I thought, can I face that without a smoke? So I picked up a few days before, and thought, right, I'll make sure, I've got enough to smoke that night, and maybe for like a few days afterwards, then I'm gonna have to try again. And I got that out of the way. Got to the following day. I probably had like about 2, 3 days worth left, and I thought, fuck this, I'm binging it. I think I probably had about like 3, maybe 4 grams left, and I just packed out spliff after spliff and just hammered it all day. Um, but I've kind of got this structure in place since that seems to have been like a sort of safety net, which is something that I haven't had before. I have, I think, like I mentioned, the world's most beautiful cat that I adore, and is probably the only person that I could live in my space with long term. Um, I've always struggled in sort of like my own sort of personal space, and this is the thing with cats, you know what I mean? It's a little bit like, yeah, I'm going through a process of sort of diagnosis for autism, which looks likely. Um, but living with a cat, it's a little bit like living, with like an autistic person who needs attention at times, but like the rest of the time, they're like, they just like their own space, and they do their own thing. I couldn't have handled. I love dogs, but I couldn't have handled something that needed that much energy from me, despite the love that they have to give. I mean, my little four-legged friend is very, very affectionate, but there are periods of time where she just likes to do her own thing, and I am likewise. But I had a friend who nudged me towards these Narcotics Anonymous meetings and sort of engaging with that. There's like a collective strength that I'd gained from it. So, if anybody else is in a real rut with this, which I'd wager there are a hell of a lot of us in this position, then I'd encourage you to have a think about it. Maybe attend a meeting, just sit in the background and see what you think. They're available all day round. It's not the answer to all your problems. You have got to address most of them yourself. Um, but coming from somebody who, particularly for the last few years, I mean, I was a fucker for it as a teenager and a young 20 something before I settled down and, met my ex wife. But, this last couple of years, my daily routine involved getting up out of bed, never been, well, particularly over like the last 10, 15 years, the older you get, probably the more you struggle to like stay asleep, etc., for long periods of time. So I would get up about 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, having gone to bed about 4 o'clock in the morning, maybe five. Um, in honesty, there's a number of times over this last sort of 2, 3 years where being awake for 36 and 48 hours at a stretch has not been a problem because I've just been fucking wired. But I would get up, basically go to my tray, roll myself a joint, go to the back door, smoke it with the door sort of part ajar, hiding behind it, because if anyone sort of came towards me or a neighbour sort of came past, door shut, hide behind, and all those issues of sort of self-hatred, self-loathing, low self-esteem, lack of purpose, and the depression and the anxiety would snowball all on top of each other. And I just wouldn't make it out of the house if I'd got up and had one. So, not good. Really not good. And obviously, like, usage had sort of really intensified over time. And it's just got harder and harder, and I've sort of really struggled to see a way out. But there's like a list of like a million and one things that I've been needing to get round to in terms of like, say, like round the flat, or in terms of, like paperwork, etc., or even things like engaging with the doctors or healthcare services to actually start addressing some of the issues that I have. So, based on being so shit at self-caring, problems would crop up as they often do the older you get, and welcome to the over 40s club, please wait in line to be assigned your unwelcome health issues, etc. That shit sort of started to build up, and I was just incapable of facing it, and it was all additional reason as to why I didn't want to be here, and just another reason why, I was getting ready to check out. And this last 30 days has been wild. The come down from the psychosis, that neurological sort of rewiring process of coping without. I've always had such intense feelings because I'm an intense person and a bloody complicated one, or, homologation of a number of different people. So it's been a bit of an uphill battle, and I think I did well to get through, that first 14 days, but started attending these meetings and found that helped give some sort of collective strength. I've had to distance myself from friends who are still smoking because I just don't trust myself to be around it. Just don't. Full stop. So, yeah, it's been pretty fucking brutal. Based off like how poorly I sleep, and there's lots of shit going on in the flat above me with antisocial behaviour, which is a killer. That's like revisiting the sort of PTSD of like what I went through in my teens, and aspects of it from my marriage as well, because I've never handled conflict well. In part, some of that, to a degree, was probably caused by my inability to. I would shut down and find it hard, if not impossible, to get what was up there to there and put it out in some sort of logical order. So I've always looked to sort of dial my senses down. I've always had issues with like sensory overload, that loud, unexpected noises, aggression, conflicts, bright flashing lights, places where there's loads and loads of people around. So it all sort of compounds each other. Makes for like looking up at like the top of Everest from the bottom, and it's like trying to climb it with like a couple of forks instead of like decent sort of crampons, etc., and ice picks. So it's been a challenge. So I know a lot of people are sort of on the wall as to whether like cannabis withdrawal is a serious thing, which I'll tell you, if you chong in an ounce to an ounce and a half a month and you have significant mental health issues, it's a thing. So for the first sort of 2-3 weeks, I just sweated all the time, just burning up, just pumping all these toxins sort of out of my system. First time I've been able to knock it on the head and not go like ridiculous on the cigs as well, which, last few times I've done that, I've been like the incredible smoking man and ended up with like yellow fingers from like the amount of fags that I've smoked in a day. But it's all started coming together bit by bit, and the support I've had from like the GPs and the wider services they've been able to offer. They've got a mental health doctor at my local surgery who's a lovely fella. He's referred me to another service as well. Looking to sort of tailor some support to help me build my confidence and socially as well, and hopefully get back towards work, which I suppose is one of my biggest worries. Because a lot of the jobs that I'm skilled to do, quite frankly, are often the undoing of me in terms of the demands that are placed on you and how much of a people pleaser I am. So some of it is how much I allow things to affect me, I know, but where I think one of my friends is right in terms of like childcare jobs, social care jobs that I've done before, is that the burden of the hours that will place onto me is something that I would quite willingly sort of immerse myself into and bite off more than I could chew, cope for a short period of time, and then go off the deep end. Um, so I'm starting to learn to be a little bit more patient with myself and go a little bit easier on myself, which is just, it feels weird. It really, really does. And I'm still not sure how I've got to sort of 30 days of abstaining from smoking pot. But I think things couldn't have got much worse, really, when I look at it, than they were. I just literally had had enough. And what I've noticed over this last few weeks is once I'd got through sort of the initial few days, it's more the routine of things that you kind of, because you've been in them for that long, that you find yourself sort of leaning towards, like that kind of, making your build, sticking your Rizzlers together or whatever, and the process of sort of chopping it up, etc. And things were fucking horrific before Christmas. I don't know whether any of you have had concussion before. I've had it twice. And pre-Christmas and during some of this recovery fit period has felt like having concussion. I have ADHD, which in turn can lead to, like sort of dyspraxic like symptoms with like, honestly, I'm like sort of that freshly born foal that's got like no coordination. It's all over the place. But yeah, I honestly, like, the pressure in my head was just immense to the stage where it felt like either my brain was expanding or like my skull was shrinking, and it was just crushing pressure that was sort of reducing me to tears and making me really worry about potentially like rupturing a blood vessel up there or something like that and having a stroke or whatever. Um, so it's been a rewiring process, and I feel enough as it is. So coming to terms with those feelings, they have been extreme, and it's taken me quite a while and a fair bit of support to realise that, like, my lack of sleep, how much I've abused myself, the issues that I have with my mental health, with my living situation, and how that affects like my capacity to actually sleep and switch off. It's all sort of compounded and sort of lumped on top of each other. And instead of being able to see certain issues as being separate, I was just sort of lumping them all together, and becoming shit scared, quite frankly. So after my last meeting with this mental health doctor last week, he kind of explained that having worked on psych wards for years, that like the majority of people that ended up there were long-term heavy cannabis users who he would watch them detox and go through this 1 to 3 month process of just ripping themselves to shreds and just being, or borderline psychotic through that period as well. Um, so it was kind of difficult to separate all these symptoms from sort of one another, and the level of like fatigue that I've had as a result's been pretty significant. But I think since about Wednesday last week, I woke up in the morning the day after seeing him, and like some of the pennies started to drop. And actually, it was the first day, in like about 3 weeks where I'd woken up and actually felt reasonably sort of physically and mentally okay. And I was able to sort of look at things for sort of what they were and not catastrophize, which I'm a fucking expert at. This last few days have been great. They really, really have been, and I've spent time reaching out, doing the things that I need to do for me in terms of like how I get myself right, how I build forward from here, what support I put in place, like, in case I waver or struggle. Reaching out and spending time talking to all the people who I love, who, again, you know who you are, and I love you all, and I'm so grateful. So I won't be here without you. So thank you. And, I don't expect this all to be linear progress. Uh, that's just not life. It's ups, downs, stagnant periods, etc., and a mixture of. But it's all starting to come together. So I just wanted to do a little something, for people out there that are struggling with mental health or addictions of various forms, and just remind you to take, like, when things are bad, just to take each day an hour or even 5 minutes at a time. You can't afford to get sort of too caught up in the future, because all we really have is the present, in which you can actually set yourself up in some ways for a better or a worse future. But if anybody's struggling with it, or you're just coming back from a slip, don't hammer yourself, because we get caught up too much over these how many days I've done clean. And if you do have a slip, that's just like further reason to pan yourself, and you don't need to do it. So reach out if you're in that situation. I might not be able to answer all the messages, etc., if I get many, because I get very sort of easily overwhelmed, and I'm still going through that recovery period myself. But, you know, there are things you can do to help you in all manner of ways. So just go easy on yourselves, and, remember that you're important, and that there are people out there who love you, but it matters most whether you can love yourself. And that's probably the most fundamental building block of them all. So I'll leave it at that, and I hope you're all doing well. Love you all. Take care.